We're in the studio. We do have a special guest who's joined us today from high up. We will say that for now. It is the Deputy Chief Minister, Nicole Manison. How are you today?
I am fantastic, and it's so great to be here with Radio Larrakia.
Firstly, there has been a lot of things being developed out in the bush recently in terms of the projects that have been going on for community housing and things along those lines.
Absolutely. Making sure that we get infrastructure right in the bush is a big priority of this government, because we know in the bush we have so many deficits in infrastructure where, whether it be housing, roads. Did you know that 75% of our road network is still unsealed in the Northern Territory? And
How do you mean by unsealed?
So in other words, that we don't have them covered. They're not asphalt. So
okay.
Basically dirt roads.
Dirt roads, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really important that we do more to make sure that we've got great infrastructure, because it's not just better for us socially, so people can get better access in and out of communities and around the Northern Territory. It's good for us economically as well. So we're really focused on delivering better infrastructure in the bush. We've got a record $1.75 billion infrastructure budget at the moment. A real strong focus of that is delivering in the bush, whether that be roads, our $1.1 billion remote housing package, which is the biggest remote housing package any Northern Territory government has ever delivered, whether it be going in and improving our schools, our health clinics, getting out there and delivering really important infrastructure for people in the bush. That's one thing we've been very focused on.
Now, a number I remember cropped up, I think it was last year, where it was said that for a kilometre stretch of road in Northern Territory is $1 million.
That would be accurate.
Is it the further you go out, does it cost a lot more? Like near Aboriginal communities, is that why?
Of course, to deliver infrastructure, the more remote the location, the more complex it is,
Sure.
And the higher the cost. I've just been having a big debate actually this week. We've had the Productivity Commission in town to look at how GST is distributed to the Northern Territory, and I was in there with them yesterday, and one thing I really tried to make clear to them was that at the moment, they're trying to take GST out of the Northern Territory, and we know here in the Northern Territory, every dollar counts. If we're to overcome Indigenous disadvantage, but also create economic development opportunities for Indigenous people, it's important that we've got the right infrastructure and the right services in place. And at the moment, the federal government is looking at a report that the Productivity Commission has done, which potentially stands to take more important GST money out of the Northern Territory. And yesterday I really tried to make it clear to them that this is not on the best interest of the Northern Territory, especially for our Indigenous Territorians and people out bush, because services for them are still not to the level we need them to be. Their infrastructure is still not to the level that we need it to be at. And if the federal government take more GST money out of the Northern Territory, well, that's not going to help us close that gap.
Another big issue as well for Aboriginal people out there is jobs, especially with the idea of infrastructure being helped developed. I understand that a lot of places are hiring local people for such as like Room to Breathe or the other housing development stuff. How about roads, and how about like local power and water? Those are huge things that are part of it, and local people being hired for that and trained.
Well, roads is one place I see some great opportunity. We do have some fantastic Indigenous business enterprises in the Northern Territory, local businesses, local councils doing work in this space to deliver roads. So I've certainly spoken to the Federal Minister about what I'd like to see, which is rolling roads programs in remote regions.
Like a rollout lawn?
Sort of. So it's about making sure that we can see a constant stream of funding coming through. So that way, not only are we seeing those improvements to those roads over time, but we've also got the ability to ensure that they can be delivered by local people on the ground.
Okay.
So that way we can train up the local workforces. They can see a sustainable line of work coming ahead of them. And that way, when people get a job, they just don't get trained, do the work, and then it's all over. Then what do they do next? It's actually ensuring that, okay, well, it is a sustainable pathway to employment, because we certainly have seen that Aboriginal businesses in the Northern Territory can do a really good job when it comes to the delivery of roads and civil projects.
So possibly in communities, will they be setting up some sort of constant business for these people to constantly keep working? Or
we're absolutely lobbying to see if we can get more funding for roads into the Northern Territory. And the more I get out as the infrastructure minister and speak to our councils, to our traditional owners out there, it's clear that everybody wants more road works done. But it's about making sure we also get more money in from the federal government too, as well as the Northern Territory government commitments, so that we can see a flow going forward through the years, so that way we can deliver more certainty to those local businesses, so we can see more local jobs for Aboriginal people on country.
All right. Now, Deputy Chief Minister, another big thing that we were hoping to talk about is your involvement as the Minister for Children. What does that entail?
So we said that when we came to government that we'd be putting children at the centre of government. We know that children are our future here in the Northern Territory. We also know that too many children in the Northern Territory have been let down, and that we're not getting it right from the moment that they are born, and not getting the right support in around them and their families. And so unfortunately we know when children are behind before they even start school, it makes it so much harder for them to catch up. So we said if we were to get into government, we'd be working with families and with our children to make sure that they're school ready from day one, term one, year one, because we know that so many children, by the time they start school in the Northern Territory, are already developmentally behind. And so when they start school, they're not reaching those very important benchmarks that make them school ready. So they're already behind. It makes it harder for them to catch up throughout their educational journey and finish school.
How would you actually try to implement something so that the children are ready for school?
So we've got an early childhood draft plan out there at the moment. We've worked with our leaders right across the Northern Territory in the space of early childhood development. So what we're focused on is making sure that from the moment mum's pregnant to when the bubba's born, and that first critical 1,000 days, that we are working with families. So if that child has any issues, if that family has any issues that are putting that child's development at risk, that we're putting the right supports around them, that we're helping them to address those vulnerabilities in that child. So the earlier you catch it and you work with those children to make sure if they've got a hearing issue, or if there are problems with violence at home, or if you can see developmentally just something's not tracking along the way it's meant to be, that you're working with that family to help that child. So we're putting through a comprehensive plan. The biggest change we want to drive as a government is how we work with our children and how we make improvements for our children in that early childhood space, because we know that's the greatest difference and the greatest legacy we're going to be able to leave as a government if we get it right for those kids, because too many Territory kids are getting left behind, and it's really hard for them to catch up through their schooling journey. And we know what happens if you don't finish school. You have far more limited options, and we can just see it through our incarceration rates here in the Northern Territory. We are failing too many of these kids. So it's really important as a government we put the right support around those families. And it's not just about the support for the child and the mum, it's about the dads too being part of this journey too, and the whole family unit. So that's something we're very focused on as government, and I'm working very hard on as the Minister for Children.
What about funding for education centres, schools and stuff like that?
So that was also another area. We did see some pretty big cuts under the previous CLP government. When we came in, we said that we would be putting more teachers in the classroom and more support staff, because we did see their numbers go. So when we came to government, we absolutely invested back into education to get more teachers on the job, more support staff in the classroom, because if you do not have the staff around there to support those kids, particularly if they've got a disability or they've got a learning difficulty, leaving them in the classroom as the whole isn't going to help them catch up. You actually have to do some pretty intensive work with them. And if the schools don't have the resources and the bodies in the classroom to actually support those kids, then it makes their jobs all the harder. And again, those kids fall further behind. So education's another area that we've made sure we've put some significant investment into, because we all know that if you've got a good group of kids that are coming through, getting a good education, then there's so much opportunity for them in their adult life. And if the education system fails them, then their opportunities after they finish school are very limited. So it has been an area we've been really focused on.
While we have you here, is there any other things you'd like to let our listeners and audience know?
Well, certainly with my Treasurer's hat on, we've got some pretty big fights on our hands with the federal government, particularly with the threats we've got at the moment for losing more GST funding from the Northern Territory. So in the Northern Territory, 50% of the funding that comes in here is from the GST. Another 20% is from tied payments with the Commonwealth Government, so that's when we have an agreement with the Commonwealth and the funding comes through for specific purposes. And then 30% we generate here from within the Northern Territory. At the moment, we've got a real issue with a report out by the Productivity Commission. This is a report that the federal government commissioned, and I think it was for a quick fix to deal with the GST situation in Western Australia. But ultimately what they're trying to do is give the Western Australians a bit more money, which would be at a cost of a place like the Northern Territory. Seeing us lose more money through the GST will make it even harder for us to make those improvements and to close the gap on disadvantage for our Aboriginal Territorians. We want to do a really good job here. We want to make sure that people that live out bush, that live in our regional areas, get all the services that they well and truly deserve.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and just great to be here and great to be talking to the audience here.